You brought shackles to a treaty meeting? That's not a good sign for peace. Valen Arix didn't flinch as the 6-foot-tall reptilian guard cracked the electric cuffs around his wrists. He simply stared at the semicircle of alien officials seated high above the chamber, his words laced with just enough dry sarcasm to sting. The Galactic Tribunal's main courtroom was colossal, cold, metallic and built to intimidate, but Valen's unimpressed posture was like a smudge on their polished theater. Around him, the crowd of alien spectators buzzed with anticipation, their various eyes, antennae and biolenses twitching in amusement. Earth had sent a diplomat, they were told. But the moment he stepped onto the defense platform without an entourage, without armor and without even a data tablet, the joke had written itself. From behind the grand podium, High Commander Varktesh sneered, a mix of mucus-lined lips curling back to reveal serrated black teeth. He looked down upon the lone human as though examining a fungus. Human envoy, your presence here is a ceremonial mistake. You come without force, without leverage, without even protocol. You are dismissed of any diplomatic standing. Your words hold no binding power here. Valen tilted his head, pretending to be thoughtful. So, just to be clear, you invited me here to tell me I have no right to be here? The chamber hissed with laughter, a low ripple of clicking tongues, vibrating air sacs and mechanical exhalations. Even the guards at Valen's back allowed themselves grunts of amusement. Somewhere in the second row, an insectoid species did a full-body shiver, the equivalent of a standing ovation in their culture. Valen had become entertainment, exactly what the tribunal had intended. But he wasn't here for applause. You represent a species responsible for 17 violations of interstellar peace protocols, Varktesh growled. Your colonies have expanded beyond the demarcation line. Your forces trespassed on Krellick's airspace. And worse, you gave shelter to our enemies. Valen's face stayed neutral, but his eyes didn't blink. Did we also steal your lunch or crash your family reunion? Because it sounds like you're just stacking accusations now. A sharp prod from an electrified baton hit his ribs. Valen inhaled, winced slightly, then offered a dry cough. Was that supposed to hurt? Because I think your power setting is still on annoying toddler. The baton raised again, but a clawed hand from another guard lowered it. The crowd needed the show. But not too fast. Behind the central tribunal desk, an elder alien, eyes milky and blinking asynchronously, spoke in a cracked voice. Let us proceed with judgment. This earthborn man shall be held until sentencing. There is no defense. No protection under current accords. No immunity. He is nothing more than a mouthpiece. Valen took a slow breath, as if letting their declaration settle. He looked around, not just at the tribunal but at the seated audience of dignitaries, merchants, warriors and mercenaries. Dozens of species from every corner of the neutral sectors, each one with their own reasons for watching Earth squirm under the boot of the galactic order. Nothing more than a mouthpiece, Valen repeated softly as if testing the words on his tongue. He looked up again, voice louder now. That's interesting. Because I didn't come here to speak. There was a pause. Just a breath's length of silence. Then why are you here, human? Barked Varktesh. Valen's eyes flicked upward toward the viewing balcony above. A cloaked figure stood motionless there, shrouded in shadow. The tribunal hadn't acknowledged him. Most hadn't even noticed him. But Valen had. And he'd known exactly where to stand for the figure to see the small rhythmic taps he had been making against the side rail. An old Earth code used before encryption systems. Valen smiled, small and sharp. I'm here for permission. The tribunal fell quiet. Even Varktesh tilted his head, confused. I tapped a message, Valen said plainly, his gaze never leaving the cloaked figure. And it wasn't a distress call. It was authorization. The lights in the chamber shifted slightly. Unnoticed before, a signal light above the balcony turned from green to red. Standard human military protocol indicating activation of a classified mission. The kind that required no clearance because clearance had already been given years ago. The cloaked figure moved. At first only a few saw it. The flick of cloth, the slow descent down a spiral path. Then the air changed, tense, sharp. One by one, even the guards began turning toward the intruder. He walked like a ghost through the chamber, every step echoing. When he reached the lower tier, he stopped, reached into his cloak and pulled out a solid object, an old badge. It gleamed like raw authority. No emblem. No rank. Just one symbol. A perfect circle, etched with 8 slashes through its center. Earth's Alpha Law Enforcement Division, disbanded 2 decades ago. Abolished by treaty. The badge was pre-treaty. Pre-code. A relic with one rule: it could be used only once. The tribunal recognized it too late. Gasps turned to shrieks as the guards raised weapons, then dropped them again as their systems short-circuited. Sparks exploded from their chests as hidden failsafe chips activated, triggered by proximity to the badge. EarthTech. Still active. Still smarter. The executioner, no name, no introduction, stepped beside Valen. Commander Varktesh stood now, disbelief carved into every scale. This is a violation of all agreed systems. Valen looked up at him. Then maybe you shouldn't have erased our envoy protections before confirming whether we brought a goddamn executioner. The badge was raised, and the room forgot how to breathe. The executioner didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of the badge he held was heavier than any threat, older than any law on that tribunal floor. Time hadn't dulled its authority. If anything, its age made it more dangerous. Like a loaded weapon no one could disarm. His cloak flowed behind him as he stepped forward, and the metal-plated boots echoed across the chamber in slow, deliberate rhythm. Every eye in the room followed him now, not because of curiosity, but because of fear. There were legends about Earth's Alpha Enforcers. Rumors that they didn't just uphold laws, they decided them. They were the final response when treaties failed, when war courts fell to politics, when systems became too corrupt for diplomacy to work. Executioners weren't soldiers. They were judgment. Valen stood beside him, the electric cuffs still around his wrists, forgotten by the guards who no longer dared to approach. He didn't bother removing them yet. He didn't need free hands to win now. The shift in the chamber's energy was complete. The tribunal that had mocked him just minutes ago now sat in rigid silence. Some leaned back in instinctive self-preservation, others whispered into communication devices that had gone mysteriously dead. Varktesh's voice broke through, forced and shaky. This is not a recognized channel of protocol. The Alpha badge has been decommissioned by all signatory states. The executioner turned his head, revealing half his face beneath the hood, an old scar traced from temple to jawline, eyes pale like storm glass. He held up the badge, then twisted it sharply. The core blinked once. A faint chime pulsed through the room, a sound encoded in dozens of alien minds. They'd heard it in war. It meant override. It meant Earth's enforcers were back in the room. One use. One override. And it had just been activated. The guards around the tribunal drew weapons, not at Valen, not at the executioner, but at each other. Confused, panicked, some had implants wired through galactic security networks, now short-circuiting from a tech script embedded in the badge's signal. Several of them collapsed mid-breath. The rest backed away, clutching at fried neck braces and blinking HUDs that no longer displayed targets. Chaos was creeping in, but still held at the edge of order by the executioner's stillness. Valen finally spoke. You declared me powerless. Unarmed. A puppet with no pull. He stepped out of the defense square and walked freely now, chains sparking with every step. But Earth doesn't send diplomats anymore. We send bait. A murmur spread across the crowd. Many now realized that this wasn't a peace negotiation gone wrong. It was a setup. But not against the tribunal. No, the tribunal was simply the stage. The real target was the traitor among them. And the executioner had come not to argue but to expose. The cloaked man reached into his belt and pulled out a second device. It was flat, disc-shaped, and already humming. He placed it on the floor. A holographic projection burst into existence, scrolling fast, flashing names, dates, records, data files. Valen pointed. Those are planetary logs from the prison moon Oresa 9. Supposedly shut down 5 years ago after war crimes were uncovered. But these files prove it was reactivated, illegally, and used for experimentation. He took another step forward. On humans, civilians, diplomats, children. Varktesh slammed a clawed fist against his podium. Lies. Manufactured records. This tribunal won't allow fake data dumps from rogue agents. The executioner reached behind his back and threw something at the foot of the tribunal's platform. It bounced once with a dull thud. A small metal cylinder. A biometric recorder. Everyone knew what it was. The tribunal leader's face dropped. Valen spoke quietly now, leaning into the silence that followed. That device holds DNA-locked testimony. From one of your own science officers. He confessed before we extracted him. He named every conspirator. Every funder. Every buyer of harvested organ stock. Including one of your council members. The hologram shifted and a face lit up across the air. It was Counselor Yov, tall, half-mechanical with gold-plated breathing lines across his jaw. He immediately stood and denied the claim, his voice desperate. This is false. Earth is trying to frame us to justify its expansion. But Executioner raised one hand, and the hologram zoomed in on a confession video. Yov, stripped of his regalia, blinked against harsh lighting as he admitted everything. The voice, the DNA match, the timestamp. Undeniable. Gasps erupted. One of the delegates in the front row stood up and activated a translation implant. This was a trap. Earth sent a man with no power just to bait out a rat among us. He turned to the others. And it worked. Yov turned to flee, but the Executioner moved. No weapon. Just motion. In one moment he was behind Yov. In the next he had forced the counselor down with a simple pressure grip. One Earth enforcers were trained to use on beings 3 times their size. He dropped Yov at the feet of the tribunal. Then he spoke for the first time. One name on that list is human. Everyone froze again. The Executioner scanned the crowd. One of your ranking members, your intel advisor, isn't alien. He's Earthborn. Defected 21 years ago. Switched identity in the Goran Fields War. You've been taking orders from a traitor who never stopped working against us. A long pause. Then a voice from the upper tier spoke. Smooth. Confident. Took you long enough. Everyone turned. A man stood from the shadows, dressed in formal tribunal robes. He removed a pair of false ocular implants, revealing bright human eyes. I wondered how many decades I could hold this seat before Earth sniffed me out. Guess it's hard to outrun an executioner. Valen stepped closer. Your name was Blake Thorne. You were a captain. You sold Earth fleet coordinates to the Gorans and got 11,000 people killed. Blake shrugged. History is just a matter of who writes it. You're not here to arrest me. This isn't Earth jurisdiction. Valen held up the badge. This badge says it is. Blake's smirk cracked for just a second. The Executioner moved again. This time drawing a baton-like device that clicked once and extended into a plasma-stabilized shackle rod. Before Blake could speak another word, the Executioner had him cuffed, silenced, and thrown against the tribunal bench. The force of it cracked the outer rail. No one dared protest. Valen turned back to the audience. This was never about starting a war. It was about stopping one before it began. Your leadership was compromised. Your courts were infiltrated. We don't need your permission to fix that. The Executioner retracted the baton, reattached it to his belt and faced the tribunal. You declared Earth powerless. But power doesn't come from noise. It comes from patience. And with that they waited, for the silence to sink its teeth in deeper than any threat could. The tribunal chamber no longer resembled a courtroom. It was something else now, part war zone, part interrogation theater and part monument to fear. The holographic files spun slowly in the center of the chamber like a galaxy of incriminating truths, each glowing shard of data a nail in the coffin of their authority. Nobody laughed anymore. No smug grins or dismissive gestures remained. They watched in tense stillness, caught in the realization that what they thought was a staged outburst from a desperate planet had been a meticulously prepared counterstrike. Everything Earth had done, from sending Valen Arwax as a seemingly powerless envoy, to activating the Alpha Badge in the most public venue possible, was engineered to force the galaxy to see what had been hidden in plain sight. This was never about vengeance. It was about optics, exposure, and undeniable evidence. Varktesh sat rigid in his chair, his claws twitching against the stone armrest as he struggled to regain control. The fear was slipping through the walls now. Not fear of humans as a military threat, that had always been a known quantity. No, this was fear of humans as strategists, as manipulators, as beings who could orchestrate a political assassination with nothing but timing and a badge long thought extinct. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. You activated the badge, but Earth has no authority here. This is a neutral tribunal. Our law supersedes outdated human relics. Valen looked at him with calm precision, the kind of quiet that unnerves more than shouting ever could. It's not a relic if the treaty was never legally ratified by both parties. Earth's copy was intercepted and destroyed. You knew that. The badge still holds power until a full re-signing. We brought the original copy. He nodded toward the executioner, who reached into his coat and pulled a sealed vault capsule. The capsule's surface bore 2 fingerprints, one alien, one human, never fully paired. An incomplete contract, void of final mutual consent. It had been kept hidden, buried beneath Earth's surface for years. Today they unearthed it for one reason only: to remind the galaxy that Earth's hands had never signed away their last line of defense. Gasps filled the room. A counselor stood abruptly and shouted for the documents to be verified. Another cried for recess. Panic was setting in again, this time political rather than physical. Because if the treaty hadn't been finalized, then Earth had never surrendered Alpha Enforcer jurisdiction. Which meant everything happening right now, this arrest, this override, wasn't illegal. It was precedent. Worse, it was precedent with centuries of legacy behind it. Valen stepped up onto the same platform where he had been shackled hours earlier. He looked at the scattered council, many still reeling from the reveal that their colleague Blackthorne had been an embedded Earth traitor. Your tribunal was infiltrated. The votes you passed were invalid. Your judges were bought. And the Goran slaver network has been using your territory to smuggle weaponized gene variants. Your hands aren't just dirty. They're soaked. He paused, then added, "This badge gives us the right to clean them." Executioner didn't bother with speeches. He activated the holographic interface on his wrist and expanded the files again. A dozen new profiles appeared: commanders, smugglers, financiers. Some were in the chamber. Some were watching from satellites. All of them now publicly named, their crimes tied to planetary coordinates, intercepted comms, and living witnesses already extracted by Earth intelligence. The room was silent except for the rotating hologram. Played a clip now, one that no one had prepared for. It showed an alien facility orbiting a red dwarf star, its labs filled with cryopods. Inside them, humans sedated, marked as biological assets. Children among them. Valen's voice, though steady, carried steel behind it. You told us diplomacy failed. That Earth was the aggressor. You burned our consulates, erased our envoys. But this is what you were hiding. Someone in the back shouted for the projection to stop. Another began to run, only to collapse as one of Earth's inserted neural disruptors activated. The executioner hadn't come alone. Earth operatives had been embedded across the tribunal days in advance, posing as low-level aides and techs. Each now in silent standby, their cover blown only when their targets tried to flee. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a sweep. Varktesh's composure finally cracked. He roared and slammed his fist into the bench, fracturing the structure beneath. You think this charade will hold? That one relic and a half-baked diplomat give you dominion over the order. Valen smiled faintly. It's not dominion we're after. It's justice. And you gave us the theater. He turned to the executioner. Proceed. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was systematic. The executioner moved through the room with methodical precision, placing lockdown tags on each of the named war criminals. Each tag activated a proximity lock. Any attempt to leave the building would trigger paralysis fields. Earth had adapted alien tech, refined it, and turned it into a portable legal system. The tribunal couldn't look away. Their own judges now sat restrained, blinking in disbelief. The Alpha badge pulsed dimly with every tag, sinking each arrest into its record. One by one the criminals were marked. Valen stepped back and spoke into a portable audio device. His words were not meant for the chamber. They were meant for every listening station, every ship, every system within range. To all observing networks, this is Earth Envoy RWX, authorized under Alpha Law Enforcement Protocol. Tribunal T-72 has been compromised. Investigation results and documentation are being transmitted now. We encourage all neutral parties to examine the findings. Let truth, not fear, decide your alliances. A few moments later, Valen received a silent signal on his display. Multiple colonies had already begun to sever ties with the corrupted tribunal. Trade routes redirected. Patrols withdrawn. The tide wasn't just turning, it had turned. Not because Earth fired a shot, but because they brought proof. Because they brought consequences. The executioner stood beside him once more, the badge now dark, its one use spent. The silence in the room was no longer tense. It was hollow. Power had shifted. Not explosively, but completely. In the wake of that quiet reckoning, Valen turned to the executioner and asked, almost like an afterthought, "What's the protocol for when the badge expires?" Executioner's answer was short. "You don't need it twice." And with that they walked away from the tribunal floor, leaving behind the shattered illusion of order, and the undeniable presence of justice done without permission. The walk from the tribunal floor to the outer corridors felt heavier than any march through war. No explosions, no gunfire, just the silent procession of two humans leaving behind the wreckage of a galactic authority stripped bare. Valen Arix said nothing as the door sealed behind them, muffling the tribunal's confused scrambling, the shouts of self-preservation, and the flickering hum of malfunctioning surveillance systems. They didn't need to run. There would be no pursuit. Not anymore. Everyone in that chamber had seen what happened when you mocked a powerless man who was never alone to begin with. As they stepped into the polished hallways of the orbital station, a pair of alien guards stood ready, eyes alert, weapons poised. They hadn't been briefed on what had just occurred. Their instructions were likely simple. Intercept the humans if they try to leave without clearance. One look at the executioner, however, was enough. His cloak barely moved, but the flash of the badge casing still hanging at his side told them more than any words could. One guard stepped aside immediately. The other hesitated, hand twitching over his weapon. The executioner looked at him once, and in that instant the poor soldier became a student of history. The weapon was lowered. The path opened. The station's central hub glowed ahead, lined with diplomatic transports and exit ports. Earth's shuttle waited quietly at Dock 17, its sleek silver shell masked under standard neutrality tags. Everything about its appearance was deliberately unremarkable. Just another envoy ship in a sea of bureaucratic movement. But within, every system was armed, reinforced, and encrypted beyond civilian comprehension. It was more secure than a military cruiser, precisely because no one would expect it to be. As they approached, Valen exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding something in his lungs since the moment he first entered the tribunal. "That was a little messier than I expected," he muttered. The executioner offered no reply. Not a grunt, not a nod. His silence was not born of arrogance but discipline. Words meant little to someone who had watched treaties crumble and leaders lie under banners of peace. Still, Valen pushed forward. "I thought we'd get one, maybe two names off that list. I didn't think we'd find Blake. I thought he was dead." The executioner stopped at the base of the shuttle ramp. For the first time since the tribunal he spoke. "Blake made a mistake. He forgot Earth forgets nothing." The hatch opened with a pressurized hiss. Inside, the ship's systems lit up, scanning both men and verifying identities. No AI voiced instructions, no robotic greetings played. Just green indicators and seamless access. They boarded together, stepping into a chamber lined with minimalist tech. Everything designed for efficiency, not comfort. A large interface panel on the wall displayed the names, faces, and tribunal systems currently under investigation. Several were flashing red, marked for internal revolt. The ripple effect had already begun. Valen sat down in the command seat, his cuffs now removed, leaving a faint red line on each wrist. He didn't notice them. He was focused on the console, reading through intercepted transmissions from systems already reacting to the tribunal's collapse. One world announced an internal audit. Another arrested its own trade minister. Two more called for emergency elections. All without a single Earth ship entering their orbit. Just data. Just truth. Just fear that they were next. "We lit the fuse," Valen said quietly. "Now let's see how far it burns." The executioner remained standing, one hand braced against the side panel, his eyes watching the shuttle doors as if expecting one last interruption. But none came. Only silence and clearance codes. As the engines began their warm-up, a secure comms signal pinged across the panel. "Earth Command." Valen answered. A hologram of an Earth general formed above the console, older, eyes heavy from years of war and politics. His face didn't move as he reviewed the report transmitted from the tribunal chamber. Only his breathing changed, slow and shallow. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. You didn't just expose corruption. You shattered a coalition that's held for 30 years. You realize what happens next. Valen didn't blink. Sir. We go quiet. We vanish again. Let them fear the next badge even if there isn't one. The general nodded once. The Alpha Badge program is permanently retired. No more field activations. You've set the precedent. We'll let the Echo do the rest. The line ended without ceremony. Valen leaned back in his seat and watched as the stars outside the shuttle window shifted. The tribunal station shrank in the distance, a dying ember in a vast sky. The executioner finally sat across from him, resting his arms on his knees, head slightly bowed. Valen studied him for a moment. There had been no celebration. No moment of triumph. Just a quiet withdrawal, like cleaning a blade after use. I used to think you were a myth, Valen said, his voice softer now. The kind of story they told recruits to scare them straight. They said the last executioner disappeared after the Unity Uprising. Said he couldn't live with the blood on his hands. The cloaked man didn't respond right away. Then, without lifting his gaze, he spoke. They were half right. Valen leaned forward, elbows on the table. Why come back now? After all this time, after hiding in the fringe colonies, why answer the call? Executioner looked up, and his eyes were not the cold instruments of war Valen had expected. They were tired. Human. Because they stopped fearing the quiet ones. Because someone had to remind them what silence can do when it listens long enough. Valen let the words hang there. Outside, stars streaked by as the shuttle jumped into transit. He thought about the faces they'd exposed. The networks they'd crippled. The traitor they'd dragged from beneath diplomatic robes. And still he knew this wasn't the end. The badge was spent, yes. But the lesson it delivered would echo longer than any gunfire. Do you think they'll retaliate? Valen asked after a moment. The executioner stood again and moved to the back of the chamber, pulling a sealed case from a compartment. He opened it just enough for Valen to see inside. It wasn't a weapon. Not directly. It was a data vault, one marked with Earth's highest clearance tier. Inside it were names. More names. Not tribunal members. Not slavers. But Earth's own. The ones who sold access, who leaked files, who profited in silence while their enemies grew bolder. They won't be the first, the executioner said simply. Valen didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. Justice, once started, doesn't get to pick a side. Cuts through everything. Even home. The return to Earth was not met with parades or medals. There were no speeches, no news coverage, not even a briefing room welcome. The shuttle landed on a darkened platform buried beneath Earth's polar command base, shielded from satellite scans and completely off-grid. Snow whipped across the tarmac, but no one moved to greet them. That was how Earth operated now. Quiet victories, surgical strikes, shadows cast long enough to terrify without ever stepping into the light. Valen Arwex stepped off the ramp with the data capsule in hand, eyes drawn to the frost-covered mountains beyond the base's glass panels. The world looked peaceful. Serene even. A bitter contrast to what he knew was coming next. The executioner walked beside him, the badge now locked inside a containment unit, stripped of its activation core. It no longer glowed. It didn't need to. The galaxy had already seen its light. In the silence of that underground corridor, the only sound was their footsteps. Two men who had broken the spine of a galactic tribunal without ever firing a single shot. But the mission wasn't over. It never had been. That was the part the galaxy never understood about Earth. They assumed everything came down to ships and weapons. But Earth's most dangerous weapon had always been memory. They passed through a series of biometric scans until they reached a steel door marked with no insignia, no number. Just a flat black panel. Valen placed the data capsule into the slot and the panel lit up. Seconds later, the door hissed open. Inside was a small, stark debriefing room. A single table, 2 chairs, and a wall monitor already displaying live reactions from across the galaxy. One screen showed protests erupting on a trade moon. Another displayed the resignation speech of a planetary governor implicated by the tribunal files. A third showed a fleet realignment near the Krellick's boundary. No war declarations yet. But the pieces were shifting. The stars themselves felt less settled. An intelligence officer entered without knocking. She was short, severe, with gray-streaked hair pulled tight and a tablet in her hand. She glanced at the executioner and gave a faint nod. Whether in respect or acknowledgement of shared history, Valen couldn't tell. She dropped the tablet on the table. We've confirmed at least 17 systems suspending relations with the tribunal's core council. 6 are preparing war crimes inquiries. And 2 major powers are asking for direct Earth mediation. They've never done that before. Valen sat, rubbing his temples. They're scared of the badge. She shook her head. They're scared because you didn't keep it. You used it once publicly and then walked away. That's what rattled them. It wasn't power, it was restraint. The executioner remained by the door, arms folded. His silence spoke volumes, but Valen needed something spoken aloud. What about retaliation? She hesitated. There's chatter. The old alliances are splintering, but not all of them are backing off. Some see this as humiliation. They'll come looking for payback, not at Earth directly, but in the quiet ways. Proxy raids. Political sabotage. Maybe a few disappearances. Valen nodded. So business as usual. She didn't smile. No, Arwigs. This is different. You set fire to the system, but now we have to live in what rises from the ashes. Whatever that is. When she left, the room fell into silence again. Valen looked across at the executioner, who hadn't moved an inch. She's right, you know. We change things, but not like they think. It wasn't about Earth showing strength. It was about showing intent. Now they know we remember. That we keep records. That we'll expose them. And that somewhere out there someone like you is still watching. The executioner finally stepped forward and placed a small chip on the table. It was a data tag freshly encoded. Valen picked it up and frowned. Another list? The man's voice was as steady as ever. The ones we missed. The ones we couldn't expose without causing a collapse. You can't kill rot all at once. You cut off the visible parts and wait. Let the infection panic. Then you extract what's left. Valen turned the chip over in his hand. You think we'll need to do this again? The executioner didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the wall display where a new feed had just gone live. A distant alien news channel reporting on a tribunal fleet's retreat. Their flagship had been renamed. The original name had been Order's Eye. Now it simply read Silent Accord. Valen watched the stream for a while, then shut it off. He understood the signal. Earth hadn't just left a message. They'd planted a new standard. And the galaxy had noticed. As they stepped out of the debriefing room, a junior officer jogged up to them, breathless. He looked barely old enough to be cleared for field operations, but he stopped with the kind of urgency that only came from fresh intel. Sir, he addressed Valen, there's a request from the Krellick sector. They're asking for a human liaison. They want you specifically. Valen raised an eyebrow. I'm not a diplomat anymore. The executioner spoke before the boy could respond. They know. Valen sighed and took the file. The junior officer saluted awkwardly and disappeared around the corner. As the 2 men stood in the hallway, Valen looked over the message. A few lines of formal language, a timestamp, and a final sentence that caught his attention. We do not seek fear. We seek clarity. If Earth remembers, then teach us how. He looked up. What if this works? What if they actually want peace now? The executioner's face was unreadable, but his words were clear. Then Earth doesn't need enforcers. Just witnesses. They parted ways in the corridor. The executioner disappeared into one of the secure wings of the base, his figure swallowed by steel doors and dim lights. No goodbye, no handshake, just a nod. That was how legends ended, not in fireworks but in shadows. Valen returned to the shuttle bay, orders in hand, a mission forming before it could be fully spoken. No badge this time. No override protocols. Just memory and the weight of what they'd already done. Before boarding, he looked once more toward the cold sky above, where stars were still realigning from what they had done. Somewhere out there, people were burning documents, fleeing systems, or perhaps trying to find new ground. Others were remembering the trial. The silence. The badge. And on 1,000 worlds, people whispered a name not as a warning but as a question. Who watches the ones in power? And in that question they knew. He might be out there still.